So in this lesson, we're going to make our way all the way to the Mediterranean coast, but we're going to stay in France. Now, it's no surprise that when you arrive there, seafood is going to be a big part of the cuisine, but we're in France still, and so a lot of the techniques will seem familiar. We'd be remiss if we made our way all the way to the French Riviera and we didn't cook an iconic dish known as bouillabaisse, a fish stew. It's kind of a big production. It's not the kind of thing that you would make for yourself on a lazy Sunday evening just before you were on your way out the door. I would say you want to make bouillabaisse for 8 or 10 people and make a big production of it. The bouillabaisse utilizes the seafood that the fishermen in the south of France catch, and it's not just familiar fish. It's not just the salmon and the shrimp and the halibut that we buy again and again. It's all kinds of fish. Some of them fairly small, some of them with not much meat but a lot of bone. And it's the bones of the fish that actually give the soup its distinctive flavor and texture. You need to make some substitutions because many of the fish that you would add to a bouillabaisse in the south of France are not available to us here. But good fish is available, and every one of the fish you buy will have bones in it. We're going to start by making a fish stock. Maybe you've made fish stock before. When you make generic fish stock, you try to keep it neutral so that you can use it in lots of different things. This fish stock has one use and one use only, and that is we're going to use it to craft our bouillabaisse. And so you may notice when you compare it to a neutral fish stock that this is pretty distinctive. All right, to begin with, what I want to do is start to cook this stock. In this pan right here, I have sweated onions and leeks, celery, and garlic. And I cooked them long and slow so they collapse and they get very, very sweet. I'm going to put this bone right here from a branzino in there and just break the bones a couple of times. I'm going to put the head in as well. The only thing you don't want to add is the guts of the fish, but typically when you buy them from your fishmonger, the gutting will already be done. The head as well has a lot of meat on it and will lend some wonderful savor. So that's going into the pot. I'll turn it up just a hair. And then I'm going to take this monkfish tail, and a monkfish is a fish that if it were whole would be about this long, and easily 1/3 of the fish is the mouth and the head. It takes its name because it looks like a monk with a hood pulled over its head and this huge mouth. It's a bottom-dwelling fish. Typically, fishermen take the head off and discard it at sea because it's such a big piece. There is a bone, sort of a cartilaginous bone that runs right here, and so I'm going to take that bone out and we'll add it to our fish stock. This meat is often characterized as poor man's lobster because the texture and the color of the meat is very similar to the texture and the color of lobster. Unfortunately, as soon as they made that distinction, it became very, very popular, and of course then the price goes up. All right, this bone I'm going to break in a couple of pieces. The skeletal system of fish tends to be a little bit more delicate, and it makes perfect sense. This fish bobs around in a gravity-neutral environment its entire life, so the bones really don't have to support their own weight. So you can see it's easy to break them apart. Now, one of the secrets to a good fish stock is that you want to sweat those bones so that they begin to fall apart, and they will fall apart pretty easily, pretty quickly. I would say usually within about 10-12 minutes, the bones will begin to first turn opaque and then break apart from one another. The significance of that is this: if you begin with a volume of bones like this, and then you cook it and it breaks down and the volume is reduced by 1/3 to 1/2, then you only need to add half as much water to cover those bones, and that will mean the concentration of the flavor will be twice as strong. You'll have a full flavored broth. And so I'm going to let these sweat over the heat, and we're going to deal with this monkfish. The skin can come right off. Monkfish doesn't have scales like other fish, and that skin can go right into our stock and it will lend some flavor. Now, as you look at this, you get the sense on this side that it looks a little bit like lobster. But when you turn it over, there is sort of a dark membrane that lays between the skin and the flesh. And what I want to do is try and clean that off. Any of this membrane and meat we trim away can go into our stock. Now, I'm going to carry on trimming that off. It seems somehow a little bit wasteful, but all of the flavor of that meat is going into our broth, and so ultimately will become part of our bouillabaisse. I take my knife, a sharp boning knife, and I get it underneath this membrane, close to one end, and I come out, and then I grab that and give it a little tension, and then angle my knife just lightly up towards that membrane. And before you know it, you have this cleaned up. If you go to a fish purveyor to buy monkfish, likely they will do this for you and you won't have to worry about it at all. But if they do it for you, and this is maybe the take-home lesson, if they do it for you, that trim is lost to you. That goes into somebody else's fish stock instead of yours. So it's a fun exercise, I think, to clean the monkfish and take advantage of all that trim. On this side, here is a little white membrane that I want to remove. And now you can see exactly why they call it poor man's lobster, because it looks very much like lobster meat. Okay, we'll play the same game here. The nice thing about this fish is that when you cook it, it's fairly meaty, and so it holds up to cooking. It holds its texture very, very nicely. So the bones from the first fish have already begun to fall apart. As an example, the tail has come off, and you can see here, this is just the collar of the fish that has separated from the rest. I'm going to move forward and add a little bit of white wine to this. And turn the heat up, and we will allow that white wine to reduce just briefly. This is the only opportunity for me to concentrate the flavor of that wine in the absence of other liquid. If I put wine and water in or wine and tomato, I could certainly reduce all those things, but I lose the ability to concentrate the wine. And the wine has acidity, and I want that acidic backbone in my stock to make it taste bright. And so we'll reduce that wine down for a minute or two. While we do, I'm going to take this monkfish and I'm going to cut it into bite-sized pieces, all ready for our stew. Figure about an inch on a side. And along the way, if you find anything objectionable that you missed, you can certainly trim that off. Now we can concentrate more fully on this stock. The bones are really breaking apart right now, and the wine has reduced. I'm going to introduce tomatoes. Canned tomatoes are fine. Fresh are great if you've got them. And I'm just going to break those up a little bit. I would say the volume of the bones has reduced now by about a third. And I'm going to introduce a couple of more things. Here is orange zest. And this is a big departure. This is sort of a Mediterranean touch to a fish stock. So orange zest makes its way in there. I've got some herbs. Here is thyme. And I'm just going to leave it on the branch because all of this will be strained out. And I have a couple of bay leaves as well. And then, and I want you to be a little bit careful with this, cayenne pepper. So you don't want to spoil the effort. You can always add more cayenne, but it's very difficult to take it out. So let's start with a pinch or two, and then we can add more later on. I'm going to rinse this bowl that had tomato in it and add hot water to this pot. And I would just make sure the bones are covered and then allow this to simmer. Fish bones are fairly delicate. They give up their flavor usually within 20 minutes to a half an hour. So it doesn't take a long amount of simmering. If you do simmer it for a long time, it won't be any better. The flavors tend to get a little dirty and muddy. So at 20 minutes, check it, and certainly no more than a half an hour. Here is a stock that I've had cooking for a while, and if I reach in here, what you'll discover is that the bones are now completely, have completely fallen apart. There's a lot of meat that's come from the bones, and the vegetables have all cooked down. There you can see one of the fish bones with no meat left on it. We need to strain all those bones out because it's never any fun eating fish and getting a bone stuck in your throat. So I've got a fine sieve here, and what I would like to do, and I'll probably do it with a ladle just so it doesn't get messy here. I want to ladle this right through this sieve. Now I can smell how rich this stock is. You know, oftentimes when you're making fish stock, the instructions will tell you to cook it very gently, but usually when you see recipes for bouillabaisse, they have you cook the stock pretty aggressively. They want all that meat to come off the bones and make its way into the broth. So keep it at a bubble. It shouldn't be at a full rolling boil, but you know, you see here, I've got it at a bubble. All right, I'm going to press on these bones because we've worked too hard to leave any of this liquid behind. All right, everything that's left in here can be discarded. It's served its purpose. And you might be curious just to taste this fish stock. It's rich, it has the flavor of the seafood that it was made from, but the nuances of orange and the leek and the garlic come through, likewise the bay. And of course this has tomato in it, which is not typical in fish stock. This, as I said, is designed just for our bouillabaisse. If you're making your bouillabaisse today, the stock is ready. If you're going to play it forward to tomorrow, take good care that the fish gets refrigerated and that the stock is cooled quickly. I would even put it into a bath of ice water and cool it down quickly and refrigerate it, because seafood likes to spoil quickly and we don't want to put all the effort into this and then have it lost to spoilage. So this is step one for bouillabaisse. Get your stock made. I can almost taste this bouillabaisse already. We've got our ingredients laid out to finish it, so let's get started. Here's the stock we made earlier, and I'm going to put it into a pan. And I want to take this stock and bring it back up to a simmer, and we're going to add some potatoes to it. And the potatoes are not just a garnish for the soup, but they'll help thicken the broth just a little bit. So as an example, here is a potato. And what I want to do is cut it in half. And then I'm going to cut it in half again. And then I'm going to cut it into wedges, just like that. Let me do it one more time for you. Half, half again, and then into wedges. And if you take a look at these, you could describe them in a lot of different ways. The way I would describe them is they look like little axe heads. This is actually by design because the thin edges of each of these will begin to fall apart as it cooks in the broth, and it will actually thicken the broth while the thick part of the potato stays behind as a vegetable garniture. Okay, so let me gather those potatoes up and we'll put those right into the broth. We'll bring it to a boil and then we'll allow those to cook. They'll probably take 15 minutes, give or take. Next, we need to put some flavor into this seafood. We need to marinate this seafood. And I have some saffron right here. Saffron is the stamen from a very particular kind of crocus. It's an expensive spice, and so to get the most of it, what you should plan on doing is soaking it in hot water. So let me add a little bit of hot water to this. And what you'll notice is that right away, the color comes out of the saffron and makes its way into the water. The other thing you get from saffron is a pretty distinctive flavor. Some people think of it as a little medicinal, but it's absolutely captivating, and if it's not there, you'll miss it. While it's expensive, it doesn't take very much. And if you buy it, just make sure to store it in a dark place that is dry. So put it in your spice cupboard in a little can and you should be fine. We're going to marinate this seafood with some of this saffron. And olive oil. And then an ingredient that's important for bouillabaisse. This is pastis. You may know it as Pernod. This is an anise-flavored aperitif wine. It has a strong licoricey flavor, and it really blends beautifully with the flavors of fish and everything that we've got in the stock, like the orange zest and the tomato. And so we'll add some Pernod here as well. It's a distinctive flavor. And while you can always add more, you can't take it out. So just be a little bit cautious with it. And then just a little squeeze of lemon juice. We'll take all of this fish and put it right into that mixture. And this could sit very happily in the refrigerator for an hour or two. You know, if you made your stock a day ahead, I would marinate the seafood overnight. And it will keep better, but it'll also garner more flavor. You can see the distinctive color of saffron beginning to stain this fish. Okay. Next, I'd like to make a garnish for this soup. It's called rouille. And it starts out as a garlic mayonnaise that gets amended. I'm going to start in the mortar here with some garlic. And we'll place that into the mortar with a little bit of salt. And then just pound it into a paste. I'm going to also add some breadcrumbs. Some recipes for rouille will have some breadcrumbs added to it. That's sort of a throwback to an earlier time, but it gives it a distinctive texture, and it's one that I like. And then we're going to add the egg yolk. Now, ultimately what we're trying to do here is mix two things that don't really like to mix. Olive oil and liquid. Oil and water don't like one another. And so we're going to take advantage of an egg yolk which has an emulsifier called lecithin, and that will help bind these two disparate ingredients together. So first we'll mix this all up. All the ingredients for this should be warm or room temperature. You don't want cold egg yolks. You don't even want a cold container to cook it in or mix it in. And I want you initially to add the olive oil drop by drop by drop, very slowly until you've established an emulsion. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second here. So drop by drop, in goes the oil. This should never look oily. It should always look a little bit creamy. If it looks oily, it's indicative of moving too quickly. And so you want to slow down a little bit. Now, already what I'm seeing is that this has started to get thick. And that's indicative of the emulsion beginning to form. I'm going to put just a drop or two of lemon juice in. And then carry on with oil. Once the emulsion has formed, you can be a little more cavalier in how quickly you add the oil, but I'll give you the same admonition I gave you earlier. If it ever looks slick and greasy, then you're probably moving a little bit too quickly and you should slow down. The nice thing about using a mortar like this is it gives you a softer consistency. Maybe you've made mayonnaise in the food processor or the blender, and it comes out a little bit thicker. And that thickness might be great if you're trying to spread it on a sandwich, but for us, I think it makes more sense to have a softer consistency to our mayonnaise. Just to make it a little bit easier on myself, I'm going to scrape this together. And you can see how thick this has become. If it gets too thick, it runs the risk of breaking. And the way to understand that is this. There is, in an emulsion, two components. There is a continuous phase and a dispersed phase. So the continuous phase began as the egg yolk, and I dispersed the droplets of oil in there, and they were kept separate by the emulsifier that is lecithin in the egg yolks. Little by little, as I add more oil, I create more droplets of oil trapped in this continuous phase. They get tighter and tighter and tighter to one another, almost like a subway car with lots of people in it. And at some point, unless I create more of the continuous phase to contain that oil, it will sort of coalesce with one another and the oil will break out. So I can introduce some kind of liquid and that will relax the emulsion. Later on, I'm going to be adding some roasted red pepper puree, and so I'm going to put some in here right now, and I think what you'll discover is that this emulsion will relax slightly, so you can see it's not nearly as pasty any longer, because I've bumped up the continuous phase, and now I can add more oil. And off we go. Again, if it looks greasy at all, if it looks anything but creamy, then you need to slow down. And again, I'm going to scrape this all together. The nice thing about making this mayonnaise yourself is that you can choose the quality of the olive oil that goes into it. For one egg yolk will emulsify probably about half a cup of oil, something like that. All right, I just want to taste this real briefly and see how we're doing. There was some salt in there. I'm going to add a little bit more. A pinch of cayenne pepper. And I want to lift it up with lemon juice. And that tastes great. So I'm going to set that aside. And we'll see how the potatoes are doing. They should be able to be pierced with a knife easily, and those are done. Make sure you're happy with the flavor. A little bit of cayenne can't hurt. Lift it with lemon juice so that it doesn't taste fishy at all. That is not something that you're after. And then make sure that the Pernod goes in, and you can appreciate and notice the Pernod because it's such a distinctive flavor and so delicious with seafood. All right, I'm going to take this seafood, and I would say that you want to make sure to have 2, 3, maybe even 4 different kinds of seafood. So we've got monkfish, we've got branzino, I've got a little bit of sea bass here as well. These are all light, non-oily fish. And right into the hot broth. If I was trying to get the flavor out of this fish, I might start it in a cool broth and bring the two up together. But for our purposes here, I think putting it right into a hot broth kind of seals the fish a little bit and keeps the flavor on the inside. Likely by the time this comes back to a simmer, this soup will be done. You want your guests to wait for the bouillabaisse, not the bouillabaisse to wait for your guests. So make sure that all is in readiness. I've got a plate that we're going to serve this in. I've got some croutons right here that have been toasted, and I'm going to rub them each with a little bit of garlic. That's done. I love the idea of taking our rouille, and we'll spoon a little bit of this rouille over the toasts, and we'll add those to the soup just as we are getting ready to serve. If you have some extra rouille, you can certainly have it on the table, and people can add it to the soup to their own taste. That's cayenne just for a little bit of extra heat. Let me set these down here for now. And now that the fish is in as well, it will lend a lot more flavor. You can see the color of the saffron staining the fish and staining the broth. And I think we're ready to go. As I said, this is a great preparation for not just 1 or 2 people, but you probably want to plan on serving a crowd. This pot right here would be a great pot of soup for 6 or 8 people probably. Be generous with the seafood and the potatoes both. We'll ladle the broth on. I'll move this over. A little rouille provides some richness. And I would make sure that each guest got 1 or 2 of these croutons with rouille, because that broth, as it soaks into the bread, is absolutely spectacular. You can see there's plenty of soup for seconds, but rush this to the table and share bouillabaisse with a group of your friends. So to go along with our bouillabaisse, I think a nice green salad would be a great thing. Now there's a salad that shows up in the south of France. You are probably familiar with it already, mesclun mix, which has become pervasive in this country, but you may not know the root of mesclun mix. There was a group of monks that populated the south of France that relied on the kindness of their benefactors to survive. And they would gather wild herbs and greens and bundle them together in mixtures, and mesclun means mixture, and in exchange for alms they would offer up these greens. I wanted to go back in time and see if we couldn't capture some of that meditative, even spiritual essence of mescaline mix and learn a thing or two. I went out to the garden today and I gathered up a bunch of herbs that I think would be appropriate for a salad. So let's take a look. Here is some blossoms. These are the blossoms from garlic chives, and they'll lend an oniony flavor, a garlicky flavor to what we're doing. Here you probably recognize radicchio. Here, another bitter green, escarole. Now, here's something you probably already have in your refrigerator. These are the leaves of celery. So the inside leaves that oftentimes end up in the garbage can make a great addition to salad. There's basil leaves. I have a little bit of parsley. Actually, and in addition to parsley, this is lovage. It's in the same family with parsley, but it has a very strong celery flavor. Frisee makes a nice fluffy salad. This is sorrel, and sorrel, or sour grass, lends a wonderful lemony flavor to what we're eating. This is kind of an exciting herb for me. This is called purslane, and purslane is one of the few vegetable sources of the omega-3 oils that are so good for your heart. It eats a little bit like a succulent. It's a little fleshy. Tarragon, which has an anise flavor, would be a nice addition because of the anise flavor of the Pernod that's already in our soup. And I would just pull those leaves from the stem. Let's see what else we have here. Arugula, I think you probably already know. There's a little bit of arugula. Along with the chive blossoms, I have some zucchini flowers, more basil. Here's some flowers that come from chives. These chive blossoms are purple, and they're gorgeous. So you get the idea. You know, spend a little bit of time. Here's a couple that I'm just noticing. These big flat parasols, if you will, are nasturtiums, and they're in the same family with watercress, so they have a peppery bite that's really attractive. All right, so you see exactly what this is all about. I'm going to put this salad together very, very quickly. I'm going to pluck some of these blossoms. Here I just uncovered a new little treasure. This is salad burnet. It has the flavor of cucumbers. It's a delicious herb. We had it growing just outside in our garden. Okay. Let me share this with you. Another blossom. These are borage flowers, and borage has a cucumber flavor to it as well. This is also a source of omega-3 oil, so very, very good for you. And we'll gather all this up for our salad as well. All right. I harvested some chives as well, and you can see them right here. I like to cut them into bigger pieces so that you can appreciate the flavor and the texture. Now, I think you'll agree that that is a pretty spectacular salad. And all it takes is a little bit of care when you're choosing the greens that go into your salad. The salad dressing that we add should be fairly simple. And I'll show you what I've got planned. I'm going to take some diced shallots and just put them into a jar. I'm going to take a little bit of Dijon mustard and put that into the same jar. And then 1 part vinegar and 3 parts or 4 parts olive oil, depending on how good your oil is. I think being a spendthrift with oil is really worth it when you're creating a salad like this. We'll shake it all up, and this is the way to get a tidy little emulsion here. And then when you're ready to serve, that's the time to just ladle this on very, very gently. You don't want to mat it all together. You don't want to beat it up. You don't want the leaves stuck together and wilted. Better that you use a little bit less and maybe take a bowl of the vinaigrette to the table with you. So this salad side by side with a bouillabaisse, and you've got a very special meal that speaks of Provence.